Blake is a miserable loser who was abandoned by his family after a witch cursed him to destroy any living thing he touches. However, when a freaky maid arrives and starts teasing him, he searches desperately for a way to break the curse so he can finally crack her. It all began when a mysterious witch placed the deadly curse on the young Duke Blake, causing his mother to become so terrified of him that she banished him to a villa in a faraway state. There, he now lives a boring life, playing the piano and writing letters to his parents, just to pass the time, and he's frustrated because he has no idea why the witch turned him into Walmart Shigaraki in the first place. However, he has a blonde, cheerful maid named Alice, with the body figure of Angela White,
Yeah, boy.
who teases him in freaky ways every day to get a reaction out of him. This makes her a mystery to him because she knows she'd be reduced to protein powder if he ever takes the bait. One morning, as Blake enjoys the tea and snacks she made for him, she flashes her thick thighs in his face. So he tells her to stop with the teasing because she's the only maid who agreed to stay with him, and he doesn't want to lose her. However, she straight up ignores him and teases him even more by baiting him to eat a cookie she's holding with her mouth.
It should have been me, not him!
Once he does, she calls it an indirect kiss, making him so flustered that he covers his blushing face while screaming out loud. A while later, Blake is seated on a bench, thinking about how he hasn't seen his family since his mom banished him, and he plans to break the curse so that he can finally go home. Suddenly, a butterfly starts pestering him, causing him to slip and place his hand on a nearby tree for balance, but the tree rots away, making him fall from the swing. While he's on the ground, Alice arrives and starts flashing her goods again. So he gets up and tells her to stop so that he wouldn't accidentally touch her. However, she corners him by a tree and asks if he wants to touch her, so he begs her to stop toying with him. The next morning, Alice serves Blake breakfast in bed, but he says he isn't hungry, so she explains that she's worried that he'd fall ill and not be able to play with her anymore. Hearing this, Blake finally agrees to eat, so Alice tries to feed him, but once he opens his mouth, she teases him once again by saying his throat game could surpass Mia Khalifa's. As he eats the food, Alice asks why he doesn't like eating, so he explains that meals have been the worst part of the day ever since he was cursed, because his parents used to stay several miles away from him at the dinner table. However, he admits that he's started eating more ever since Alice arrived and thanks her for it, causing her to smile. While carting away the dishes, Alice informs Blake that his close friend, Philip, is coming to see him soon. On the day Philip is meant to visit, Blake gets nervous and considers canceling the visit using a letter, but Alice calms him down by reminding him of how Philip used to play with him when they were younger and bringing up how he's already practiced greeting lines from ChatGPT in anticipation of Philip's arrival. As Alice helps him get dressed, Blake tells Alice that he'll never forget how Philip was the only one who looked at him differently when all his other friends avoided him because of the curse, and he's hoping to become friends with him once again if Philip is still chill with him. While placing the tie around his neck, Alice intentionally bounces her melons inches away from his face, and this makes him blush, so he asks her not to behave that way in front of Philip because he doesn't want another man to see her plots without the package. Alice promises to only do it for him and moves in close to him while explaining that it's only fun if she sees his reaction, so he freaks out once again. Soon after, Philip arrives with a bunch of guards, and Blake tries to talk about old times, but Philip suddenly acts like he doesn't remember him at all. Blake then tries to approach him, but his guards immediately form a wall in front of him, and even though Philip lies that they're just doing JoJo poses, Blake gets sad because he knows they're actually protecting Philip from him. As they drink tea together, Blake feels frustrated that he got his hopes up for nothing, and he asks Philip why he's there, but Philip changes the subject by asking if Alice is staying there alone with him, so Blake explains that he also has a butler who is currently injured. Just then, Philip tries to light a cigarette, but the table shakes, and a vase falls. Blake catches the vase, but the flowers instantly rot away, causing Philip and his guards to tremble in fear like morons. Soon after, Philip asks to use the bathroom, and Alice decides to lead him there. On the way, he suddenly stops Alice and promises to find her another job if she leaves the mansion with him because he feels that living with Blake is too dangerous for her, but Alice refuses. Suddenly, Blake storms in and angrily warns him to stop disrespecting Alice. As Blake gets closer to him, Philip pushes him back with his staff and calls him a monster, leaving him stunned. He then explains that he was forced to come here by Blake's mom, who plans to have his younger brother inherit the family title and cut ties with Blake entirely. While walking away, Philip admits that he's scared of Blake and swears to never come visit him again. As Philip leaves, Blake's depression reaches a new level, and Alice worries for him, but he masks his pain with a smile and tells her he's fine. Later that night, Blake is seated alone in the yard, wondering if Alice loves him, but Alice shows up with a cheerful smile and invites him to dinner. On the way, Blake tells Alice that he doesn't have the right to love her since he can't touch her and can't even give her a flower without it rotting away. But Alice grabs the flower from his hand and tells him that the wilted rose is a great present for her, since it signifies a proposal. She then promises to join him in finding a way to break his curse, and as she walks away, Blake swears to himself that he'll one day put a ring on her finger with his own hands. The next day, Blake is trying to read the latest chapter of One Piece manga, but Alice suddenly pops up beside him and stares at him, so he complains that she's too close. Alice explains that she loves seeing his reactions up close because they're too cute, so he turns and covers his eyes to stop himself from getting embarrassed. However, Alice goes to the other side and calls him adorable, so he freaks out as he realizes that his ears are defenseless. Shortly afterwards, Blake's butler, Rob, arrives and informs Blake that he'll be returning to work that day because he's fully recovered from his back injury, so Blake gleefully welcomes him. Rob then apologizes to Alice for leaving all the house responsibilities to her during his injury break, but Alice says it's fine because she got to spend nights alone with her boy toy.
What do you mean by that?
So Blake scolds her for trying to confuse him. After Rob leaves the room, Blake says he's shocked that the old-timer is already working hard at the estate, despite just recovering from an injury, and Alice points out that he's even doing jobs that are too much for her to handle, so Blake concludes that Rob is superhuman. Apparently, Rob has been a butler to Blake from the time he lived at his family's residence, and he was the only one to come with Blake to his current mansion, so Blake sees him as a father figure. While sitting down, Blake asks Alice why she's just standing by like the Statue of Liberty, so she explains that Rob has done all the work she planned to do, and waves her milk factories in his face while asking if he doesn't want her presents.
It should have been me, not him!
Blake explains that he can't focus on reading while she's there, but Rob interrupts to inform Blake that he's made tea for him. As Rob serves him the tea, Blake tells Rob to let Alice do some of the work at home, since he's still recovering from an injury, but Rob says he doesn't need to worry about him. However, Rob agrees to split the cleaning tasks with Alice and calls her to follow him, so she flashes him her cupcakes one last time before leaving.
Yeah, boy.
A while later, Blake is walking through the hallway, and Rob tries to grab him, thinking he's Alice, so Blake jumps out of the way and asks if he's that desperate to travel to the afterlife. Rob apologizes and explains that his eyes have been blurry lately due to old age while trying to grab the door beside Blake, but Blake moves out of the way again and asks him to look out for himself a bit more. However, the old-timer still acts clueless, so when Blake begs her to talk some sense into him, but Rob riskfully grabs her face to confirm if it's really her. After scolding him, Blake gets exhausted and tries to rest on a table, but Rob quickly snatches the vase behind him and assures him that he'll keep working there for as long as he lives, since his body remembers how to do the work perfectly. Just as Blake starts getting hopeful, the old fool's heart gives out, making him fall in pain. Hours later, Blake plays a Bruno Mars song on the piano, and he's been writing his own original songs that would allow him to make a living if his family abandons him. For as long as he can remember, the only thing he was praised for was his piano playing, so it became his dream and his only hope. Suddenly, Alice appears once again and startles him with a question, so she apologizes and explains that she heard his beautiful song while she was cleaning. Blake tells her to come up to speak to him like a normal person next time, but she leans into him again while asking what he means by normal, so he tells her to go continue her work instead of bugging him. However, as she cleans the chimney, Bro stretches his head like a giraffe to admire her bouncy peaches, so she jokingly tells him to stop staring too hard. Seeing that she's doing it intentionally, Blake tells her to sit beside him while he plays his music, so she does, and he spends the next several minutes playing his latest piece. During the song, Alice remembers him picking up a rose for her and clutches her body while smiling passionately. After the performance, she tells him the song was beautiful, so his face turns red like ketchup as he confesses that it's a ballad he composed for her, and he actually really wanted to hear it with her. Since he's exhausted, he decides to take a nap on the piano and asks her to wake him when dinner's ready, and she leans in close to kiss him goodnight, but stops and smiles at him before leaving. The next morning, Blake is writing some songs while admiring the view outside, but his younger sister, Viola, suddenly arrives and starts complaining about how dull his mansion feels. Viola nonchalantly walks past Blake, without caring if she bumps into him, and cheerfully greets him. So Blake calls Alice and scolds her for letting Viola in without permission again. Shortly afterwards, Alice serves Viola some sweets at the table, and Blake asks when she's leaving, so she explains that she won't be staying long since their mom would get angry if she found out she's there. When she notices that he's staring at her, she playfully accuses him of being Diddy's disciple, and this makes him realize that he can't handle her personality. After Alice serves her another round of sweets, she asks Blake if he likes Alice, so he admits that he adores her, and she decides to be his personal wingwoman by teaching him all the lovey-dovey techniques she learned from K-drama. After toying with her brother for several minutes, Viola decides to take her leave, and Blake asks her to stop dropping by unannounced, so she tells him to hurry up and break the curse so they can live together again. This makes him blush, so she teases him and tries to leave, but she bumps into her crush, Rob, who makes her brain overheat with his World War II pickup lines. After Viola leaves, Blake freaks out like a pathetic idiot when he sees a cat in his house, and he asks Alice to take it out, but she teases him for being a chicken, so he explains that he's scared of unaliving animals by touching them. While petting the cat, Alice notices that it has a collar, so Blake suggests letting it loose in the forest. Suddenly, the cat starts chasing Blake, and Rob catches it but lets it loose immediately after, so it chases Blake downstairs, where Alice teases him once again with her milk jugs. After the cat has settled down, they find a note on the cat which shows that it's been abandoned, and Blake remembers how he was cast away similarly, so he feeds the cat outside. Later that night, Blake tells Alice about how his grandfather used to practice dancing with her mother in the ballroom and invites her to dance with him. So she agrees and spends several hours dancing with him under the moonlight without making contact with his body. The next morning, Blake greets Alice while she's sweeping up the house, but as usual, she leans in close to him to greet him back and teases him. A while later, Blake is playing snooker, and his servants are impressed that he's a master, so he explains that he used to play by himself during his spare time. Alice then challenges him to a match where the loser has to do whatever the winner says, but when it's her turn to start, she does a freaky pose while showing him that she's good at handling long sticks. After minutes of playing together, all that's left on the table are the white and black balls, and Alice fumbles her attempt, so Blake moves to play his turn, confident that he'll get the W. As he poses to strike the ball, he brags about the slam dunk he's about to perform, but Alice says some unholy words to him, which makes him imagine her in OnlyFans positions, so he asks her to stay quiet during games. However, he accidentally knocks the black ball with his stick, so Rob fouls him and permits Alice to shoot the ball from wherever she wants. Without hesitation, she places the white ball close to the black one and sinks it into the hole effortlessly to win the game. While moving closer to Blake, she reminds him of the condition of the game, and he starts panicking, thinking she's about to ask him to do a personal cream show for her with his love bone, but instead, she asks him to go on a trip into town with her. Later, in the garden, Blake asks Alice why she wants to go to town, so she explains that there's a festival where people will wear costumes and assures him that he won't hurt anyone since his costume is thick. Blake complains that he's not used to going to places filled with people, but she tells him that it wasn't very crowded last year when she attended and begs him to go to town with her with puppy eyes, so he finally agrees. The next day, Blake is wearing a Temu Birdman cosplay while walking through town with Alice, and he tells her she looks good, so she thanks him and points out that the area is more crowded than she thought. Suddenly, a random lady passes by, and Blake tries to avoid her but ends up colliding with Alice, causing him to freak out. However, Alice is completely fine, and she tells him that he has nothing to worry about since he's encased in steel. When he complains that the costume is heavy, she asks if he wants to go home, but he decides to carry on with the trip since it's what she wants, so she thanks him. While walking ahead, Alice is yapping about how she's always wanted to go on a public date with Blake, but bro is fighting for his life behind her while avoiding people. She turns back to talk to him, but can't see him around because he's lying on the floor like a used rag, begging to go home. As she searches for him, a masked lady suddenly grabs her and asks if she's Sharon, but Alice explains that Sharon is her mother, so the lady explains that she's an acquaintance of Sharon's and walks away. Meanwhile, Blake is trying to find his way back to Alice, but a lost boy grabs him and starts crying for his mom, so he heads over to a piano to play a comforting song for him. After scanning the area, Blake starts playing a fun jam, which everyone around, especially the boy, enjoys. Before long, the entire street looks like a scene from a Bollywood drama as everyone around dances together to Blake's song, but Blake notices that the boy has reunited with his mom, so he stops playing. After waving them goodbye, he decides to continue his search for Alice, but she suddenly pops into his costume and asks him not to go off on his own. Sensing that Blake is tired, Alice suggests heading home to rest, but Blake says he wants to stay in town with her a while longer. The lovebirds spend several hours having fun together at the festival, and they soon arrive at a store where Blake finds a mask that looks just like him. So he and Alice laugh about it. However, the merchant reveals that the mask was inspired by the Duke of Death, who lives in a mansion in a forest, so Alice drags him away from there. While chilling on a bridge with Alice, Blake says he isn't surprised that rumors are being spread around him, but the taste of ice cream cheers him up, so he offers some to Alice. Afterwards, they head to a clock tower, where Blake admires the view of the moon, and Alice tells him a fairy tale about a princess who married on the moon. Once upon a time, there was a brave prince and a beautiful princess who were deeply in love and planned to get married, but a jealous witch took the prince to the moon. Every year since, on the night the princess was meant to wed, she'd look towards the moon and offer a kiss to him. After hearing this story, Blake claims it's the opposite of his situation with Alice, because even if he loves her so much, he can't hold her on their date. However, Alice says she still has fun during the date because just being around him makes her happy, and she asks him to always keep her around because she'd love to get as close as she can to him and gaze into his eyes. Later that evening, Blake finds a note where Alice asks him to come to her room if he can't sleep, and when he arrives there, he sees her wearing zero plot covers, so he rushes outside and asks her to get dressed. Once she does, he enters the room, and he tries to keep his gooner instincts at bay, but he suddenly finds her peach protectors on the table, which makes him freak out. As he drinks his tea, she tells him to take off his coat and lie on her bed, and he complies but starts panicking because he thinks she's about to risk it all to taste his cursed eggplant. However, she simply tucks him in and explains that she was only trying to help him relax so he can fall asleep. Blake then asks her if she's free the next night because he wants to show her something, and she agrees to follow him. The next evening, Blake and Alice are on a boat together, and he tells her he invited her there to see the shooting stars he once saw when he was younger that changed his life. However, his real plan is to tell her how he really feels about her during the shower. But when it's time for the shower, his hat flies away from his head. Alice tries to grab it but ends up falling into the river, so she asks him to kiss her so they'd have the poetic ending the lovers in the folk tale never got. However, Blake doesn't go through with it, so she makes him fall into the river and asks him to return home with her since the meteor shower is already over. The next morning, Blake is in his study, feeling bad that he turned down Alice's offer to kiss him, but his servants suddenly arrive with some new books for his collection, so he asks them to arrange the books according to genres. While they do, Blake notices that Alice is looking away from him, and this confuses him because he remembers her being chill with him after the whole boat incident. He feels that she might think he's avoiding her, so he tries to start some small talk, but she ignores him and continues stacking the books. He then tries to approach her, but she dashes away from him faster than a Kryptonian on crack, so the desperate simp goes on his knees and begs her to stop avoiding him. However, Alice claims she's not avoiding him, so he explains that she's not being her usual freaky self, but she says he's lying and walks away. He becomes so down bad that he offers his body to her on a silver platter to tease and feast on as she wants, but she coldly walks away to continue her work, leaving him drowning in misery. When he complains about Alice's sudden change to Rob, the old-timer says she's acting like herself to him, but Blake decides to find the root of the problem because he feels that Alice would never avoid him for no reason. While watching her work, he notices that her face is red, so he asks Rob to feel her head for him, and they find out that she's sick. Soon after, Alice is resting in her room with Blake by her side, and he feels that she caught a cold after she fell into the river, but she reveals that she caught it after spending the night stalking him while he was sleeping. She then asks him to leave her so he wouldn't catch her cold, but he says he'd rather stay by her side and give her moral support while she's feeling weak. Seeing that her face is burning up, he covers a blanket, but she explains that it's not caused by a fever but rather by his riz. That evening, as Alice makes Blake's bed, he notices that it's cold outside, so she offers to warm up his hands with her steamy natural buns, but he reminds her that he can't touch her. She then suggests that they play in the snow together the next day, but Blake declines because he wants to spend the day inside, free from the cold. However, she wraps a scarf around him, which he made herself, and asks him to put it on while playing with her outside the next day, so he promises to join her. The next morning, the lovebirds step outside and see that their yard now looks like Winterfell, so Blake rushes ahead to play in the snow but falls like an idiot. Since his maid Mammy is looking extra gorgeous, he welcomes her by cheerfully throwing a snowball at her melons, so she gives him a peek, which makes him faint from excitement. Just then, Rob arrives and joins the fun by rolling up a snowman, so Blake and Alice start rolling up some snow as well. When Alice starts teasing Blake, he gets flustered and jumps away, so she tells him to rest while she continues gathering snow. However, Blake tries to land a surprise attack with a snowball, but Alice swiftly dodges like Ultra Instinct Goku and hits him with a barrage of snowballs. He throws more snowballs at her, but Alice dodges every single one, and Rob enjoys watching their youthful romance like an episode of Love Island, until they nail him in the face with a snowball. After hours of playing around together, Blake and Alice return inside, where Alice asks Blake to give his clothes so she can do laundry, but he refuses because he doesn't want to let go of the scarf she made him and runs away. While taking off her hair cover, Alice notices that her mother's earring is missing, and she tries to head outside to get it, but sees that the snow is too intense. Seeing that his hubby is suffering, the Simp King goes outside and starts digging through the snow to find her earring, but he gets exhausted and passes out. Suddenly, a magical bat transforms into a masked lady who lands beside him and calls out to him, making him freak out. She then tries to help him up, but he explains that he's cursed and gets back up on his own before explaining that he's searching for his maid's precious earring that got lost in the snow. The lady is surprised that he's going through so much trouble for a maid, so he explains that Alice is very special to him, which shocks her even more. When he asks what she's doing there, she explains that she got lost after separating from her friends, and she was planning to rob their mansion for food before she found them. Unfortunately, Blake's shovel gets stuck in the snow, and he tells her that his hands are going numb, so she advises him to give up and search for it next spring when the snow melts. However, Blake says it would be rusty by then, and reveals that he wants to see the delighted look on Alice's face when he returns it to her before passing out. Moved by his words, the lady takes off her mask and uses a spell from Fire Lord Ozai's playbook to melt the snow. When Blake wakes up, he's surprised that the snow around him has melted, and the lady hands him the missing earring while introducing herself as Cuff, the witch. As they walk through the hallway, Cuff explains to Blake that she can't break his curse, and she asks if he's sure about letting a witch into his home, but he says it's fine since he wants to thank her and ask her more questions. They soon meet up with Alice, and Blake tells her that Cuff is a witch who saved his life, but she scolds him for going outside despite her warnings. When he hands her the earring, Alice thanks him and expresses how happy she is that he's okay, but Cuff suddenly drags her to the bathroom to have a conversation. While waiting for them, Blake notices that they're taking long, so he imagines them doing freaky moves on each other in that bathroom. But when they arrive, Cuff explains that Alice was helping her mend her coat. After bribing Cuff with an army's worth of food, Blake asks her for information on the witch that cursed him, but she says she has no idea about that and tells him about how humans hunt down witches, which is how she and her friend lost their parents. Since her father is a human, Cuff is a half-witch, half-human hybrid, but she has nowhere to belong because she's shunned by both groups, and Blake is surprised that she saved him even though he's a human, so she explains that it's his determination that moved her. After Alice hands Cuff her coat, she starts yapping about her friend, so Blake assumes that she likes him, and this makes her so flustered that she jumps through his window and flies away. The next morning, Alice serves Blake some tea while complimenting his outfit, so he thanks her and asks if she ever gets bored with wearing the same maid uniform every day, but she reveals that she changes every day and flashes her thighs at him once again. Later that morning, Blake is composing music in the living room, and Viola arrives to toy with him as usual, but she runs into Rob, who makes her face turn into a tomato again. After Rob leaves, Blake calls Viola a panther, so she explains that she fell in love with this older man because boys her age act too immature for her. When Blake reminds her that Rob is a servant, she throws a flower in his hat and reminds him that he's also simping for a servant of his own. Shortly after, Alice serves them sweets, and Viola decides to find out what kind of woman Alice really is. After inspecting her for several seconds, Viola says she has no charm, but when she notices the weapons of mass destruction Alice is packing, she asks to play with them. Once Alice agrees, she spends several minutes bouncing them around, and even though she's enchanted by their softness, she tells Alice that she has no charm and decides to teach her the Viola method of being charming. She then asks Blake to face the wall and begins her lesson by showing Alice how to make charming faces, but Alice glazes her cute face instead of following her instructions. When she finally follows Viola's instructions, Viola asks Blake to turn his face, and he's completely stunned by how charming he looks, so she praises Viola for being a good teacher. Just then, Rob arrives and informs Viola that her butlers are calling her to go home, so she starts sulking over the fact that she didn't get to talk to Rob. Seeing this, Blake advises her to rizz up Rob using the Viola method, and she tries to do it, but she gets so overwhelmed by his Sigma energy that her brain overheats. The next day, Viola cheerfully returns to the mansion, but the first person she sees is Rob, so she starts stuttering like a gorilla on meth. As they walk through the hallway together, Rob informs her that Blake is in the kitchen, but she doesn't care about that at all because all she wants to do is admire her gray-haired, wrinkly Prince Charming. When they enter the kitchen, they see Alice feeding Blake some food, so Viola asks what they're doing, and they explain that they're making good food in an attempt to draw the witch back to their mansion using its scent. Viola doesn't give a rat's turd about witches, but she sees this as the perfect opportunity to win Rob over with her womanly charms, so she begs Alice to let her join. After she wears an apron, Blake gives her a LeBron James-level assist by asking Rob to make some bread with her. While rolling through dough together, Viola starts simping for Rob, and he asks her what shape they should mold it into, but she asks him to pick since she doesn't have any idea, so Rob molds them into cute cats, causing her to drool over him once again. As she molds her own bread, Viola says they look like a married couple, but Rob says she's too young to be his wife, and the word, wife, makes her geek out once again. Deep down, Viola is thankful that her brother has kind souls like Alice and Rob around him to give him emotional support when he's down, but she tells Rob to advise her brother to stop goofing off so that his brother won't steal the throne from him. However, Rob thanks her because he knows that she cares for Blake despite her harsh words, but she goes into simp mode once again. A while later, Viola is getting into her carriage, and she feels sad that she didn't get to spend more time with Rob, but suddenly, Rob arrives and gives her a basket of bread to take home, which makes her extremely happy. The next day, Alice is skating on ice while Blake admires her from the sidelines, but a talking bird suddenly arrives and asks if he's seen his friend. The bird introduces himself as a witch named Zane and says he senses cursed energy coming from Blake, so Blake explains that he's been cursed by a witch and informs him that his friend, Cuff, left their mansion a few days ago. When Alice joins them, Zane transforms into his full body form and starts using TikTok pickup lines on her, so Blake pushes him back and marks his territory around her. Zane explains to Blake that he's really into girls, but he doesn't find Cuff attractive because whenever he tries to flirt with her, she nonchalantly responds that there's no point in flirting. He then reveals that he's really into large melons, but Blake says he's more of a thigh guy, so Alice writes this down, causing him to scold her. As they brainstorm about how to find Cuff, Blake asks Zane to use magic, and he says he can't do it but complains that he needs to find Cuff soon because she's dumber than Patrick Star. However, Alice reveals that she's been warming Cuff up inside her milk factories after finding her in the ice, and when she places her on the ground, Cuff transforms into her human form. As Zane and Cuff catch up, Blake invites them to join him in skating, so they all put on ice skates and play on the ice together. After hours of lovey-dovey skating together, Blake thanks the witches for joining them, but Cuff informs Blake that they plan to take him to the gathering of the witches called the Witches' Sabbath on the night of the full blood moon so he can investigate the witches. This makes Alice remember her encounter with the strange masked lady, so she begs Blake to let her come along so she can confirm something at the gathering. Later that evening, Viola arrives at Alice's room, and she's shocked to see her melons on full display. When enjoying tea together, Viola tells Alice that she has a crush on Rob, and Alice says he's a perfect match for her, which makes her happy. When Viola asks who Alice has a crush on, she says he's her personal Prince Charming who saved her in her time of need, so Viola promises to help her get him. Viola then confesses that she's always wanted an elder sister who would pamper her and falls asleep on Alice's shoulder. Suddenly, Blake shows up to look for Viola, so Alice suggests to Blake that they compliment her as much as possible the next day to make her feel pampered. Several days later, Alice serves Blake some tea, but he complains that the shoulders of her maid outfit are inappropriately exposed and asks her to wear something normal, so she teases him by putting on outfits that are even freakier. Soon after, Blake enters the conservatory to do some reading because it's cold outside, but he sees that the place looks like the Evian forest, so Alice explains that she and Rob forgot about the place. Blake suggests that they clean up all the bushes, so she pulls out some cleaning items from her milk packs to help with the process. During the cleaning, Blake uses his curse ability to rot away the plants around him, but this reminds him of how he once accidentally unalived some small animals when he was younger. The recent events allowed him to discover the loopholes in the curse. Firstly, people can get very close to him without rotting away, and if his clothes are thick enough, they can make contact with him without dying. In addition to this, people touching objects he comes in contact with would be fine, and he can grab the clothes of people as well. These are the rules made by the witch who cursed him, so he feels that he's been under her control ever since the day she cursed him. Blake then sees Alice admiring some flowers, but she asks him to destroy them while she heads over to clean the other part of the room. However, he uses the flowers in their dried form to make a tiara and places it on Alice's head, so she thanks him and promises him that she'll treasure his gift. Blake swears to himself that he won't remain under the witch's control for much longer, and when he remembers Cuff's explanation of the witch's Sabbath, he decides to find some leads on how to break the curse so he can return home to his family. Later that evening, Blake strolls through the hallway, and he hears Alice screaming, so he rushes to check on her, only to see her in her natural bathing suit, which makes him freak out. When they calm down, Alice explains that a cat slipped into her dressing room while she was in the shower and snatched her gown, so he promises her that he'll get it back from the cat. As he walks there, he notices that Alice is walking behind him, so he tells her to stay behind, but she insists on coming along since she's the one responsible for the mess. Seeing that he can't convince her otherwise, Blake places his jacket over her, and she teases him while they walk through the hallway together. Eventually, they find that cat, but Alice notices that it's already ripped her gown to shreds, so she explains to Blake that the cat was probably trying to take some threads back to its nest. Blake offers to buy her a new one, but Alice informs him that the gown the cat destroyed was her favorite because he once complimented her looks while she was wearing it. After she takes off her maid outfit, Blake suggests that she take a bath, and she invites him to join her, but he runs away. Several days later, Cuff and Zane arrive to take Blake to the witch's Sabbath, but Blake is still busy rattling his brain to figure out what to carry with him. When he asks Alice if she's scared, she says she isn't, and reveals that she has some presents packed up in her milk factories for the witches. However, Zane and Cuff suddenly arrive, and Cuff burns down Blake's bag of weapons while explaining that he doesn't need it because he's in danger, as long as they don't find out that he's human. Alice asks if she can come along for the witch's Sabbath, and Cuff immediately agrees, but Blake is confused by how casual they are about it, so Zane assures Blake that he'll protect Alice. Zane then asks Cuff to create some robes for them, and once she does, he explains that they'll be disguised as his brother and sister during the event. Afterwards, Zane creates a magic portal, which everyone passes through to the dimension of witches, and as they move ahead, Blake is spooked because the witches around look like monsters. Suddenly, an eyeball rolls to his leg, and the boy who owns it rushes over to pick it, but he transforms into a terrifying monster that makes Blake's soul leave his body. At the start of the event, a masked witch named Daleth appears and starts taking attendance, so Zane explains to Blake that she's their leader. After taking the attendances of Zane and Cuff, Daleth asks who Blake and Alice are, and Zane reminds Cuff of the plan to say they're his siblings, but the airhead says they're their son and daughter, causing him to scold her. Daleth then makes some light announcements about plants and declares that the Sabbath is over, and Blake is surprised that the meeting is already over. Just then, an ugly witch asks Zane why he chose to crack Cuff, who has human blood running through her veins, but Zane takes away his cigarette and asks him to apologize to Cuff, since she's a respectable witch. Once he does, they all start playing ball together, but Alice approaches Daleth, who instantly recognizes her from their previous encounter. When she asks why Alice came, Alice explains that she wanted to know if her mother was connected to the witches, but Daleth says she's only an acquaintance. Blake meets up with Alice to get a handkerchief, so she asks if they're dating, and Blake admits that they aren't. However, she suddenly mentions his curse, so he asks how she knows about it, and she explains that she saw him at an aristocrat's mansion when he was younger. She also reveals that she knows the witch who cursed him, but when they ask who she is, Daleth informs them that she's already dead, and she has no idea about how to break the curse. Blake is shocked to hear this, so he starts pestering her with questions about how the witch died, but Daleth says she died because she was a whiz at magic, and she doesn't know more than that since she hated the witch. She then asks him to give up on trying to undo the curse, because it's more complicated than a normal curse, and burns up his disguise, allowing all the witches around to sense that he's a human. The witches start chasing after them, and one of the witches attacks with magical vines, but Blake rots away the vines to save Alice, and the gang escapes through a portal back to the mansion. Blake then thanks Cuff for helping them and asks why she's going so far for them, so she explains that she wanted to become friends with him after seeing how far he was willing to go for the person he cared about. Hearing this, Blake excitedly tells her he also wishes to be friends with her, so she drags Zane out of the room and tells him that they'd start over as friends next time. The next morning, the lovebirds are chilling in the garden, and Blake asks Alice to try wearing a white gown since he'd love to see her in a wedding dress, but his daydreams make his brain shut down. A while later, Alice shows Blake a magic pot made by a certain witch, and she explains that she bought it in town a few days prior because it has books with cooking recipes. As she fills the pot with water, Blake asks what she aims to make, and she says it's something between a soup and a love potion. Blake asks if he really has to accompany her, and she says he does since she's doing it for him because she wants to see his reaction. She then whispers a pickup line to the pot, and it suddenly heats up while rejecting her, which makes Blake wonder what kind of weird tastes the witch has. After placing all the ingredients in the pot, Alice starts stirring the mix, but Blake is confused by the fact that some witches are wild and evil, while others are cool like Zane and Cuff. He remembers Daleth telling him to give up on trying to break his curse, but he decides not to and starts brainstorming about a way to proceed until the pot suddenly yells at him. Seeing this, Alice explains that they can tame the pot using some magic words suggested by the book, and she then reads another pickup line, which makes the pot so flustered that it releases a smokescreen in the area. Seconds later, she hands Blake the spoon and asks him to think of all the fun and happy things in his life while stirring the pot, so he follows her instructions, but his dirty mind starts picturing Alice doing some fan service, which makes his head catch fire. Alice then reveals that they aren't making a random soup, but rather a potion to remove the witch's curse, and the potion won't be effective if he gets distracted while stirring it. Hearing this, Blake freaks out while admitting that he got distracted, but she says it's fine, as long as he doesn't think about the curse, and explains that she wanted to try it out as a potential cure since the witch that cursed him is dead. She then feeds him some of the potion, and he screams in agony while complaining that it tastes worse than your grandma's sweaty armpits. To test it, it works. Alice hands Blake a flower, but when he holds it, the flower withers away as usual, making them realize that the potion is fake. Despite this, Blake thanks Alice for her words of encouragement, so she promises to find another way to break his curse the next day. After brainstorming about what to do with the magic pot, Blake hands it to Rob to use in his gooning exercises, and the pot instantly falls in love with him because of his fashion sense, so Rob cheerfully carts it away. However, Viola suddenly arrives, overflowing with jealousy as she marches ahead to take care of the pot that wants to steal her daddy. A while later, Alice hands Blake a piece of sheet music to play, and explains that it's the final score that the composer McFarlane wrote before he died, which is believed to be the most beautiful piece of sheet music. She then tells him a rumor which says that anyone who performs the song will go mad, and this makes Blake freak out, but she also claims that his curse will be cleansed if he plays it, so Blake agrees to do it. As he plays the song, a short old man appears on the keyboard, and he introduces himself as McFarlane while explaining that he's now a ghost who watches over his music piece because he believes that no one can ever play it perfectly. Blake starts scolding him for being weird, but Alice asks if he's running mad, so McFarlane tells him not to bother explaining to her because only the performer can see him. The corny ghost then starts opening up Alice's outfit to distract Blake with her plots, and Blake warns him to stop, but he takes things even further by charging in to kiss her. However, Alice punches the old fool away, so she asks if she's secretly a Soul Ray Yaper, and she explains that she isn't. Since his freaky tactics didn't work, McFarlane tries to distract Blake further by biting his hand, but Alice helps Blake flip the pages, so the old ghost finally gives up. Blake goes plus ultra while playing the song because his only talent is playing the piano, and he desperately wants to get rid of the curse so that he can build a future with Alice. When he's done with the performance, the notes on the book disappear, and McFarlane applauds him while vanishing into thin air, but Blake is disappointed that McFarlane is the one who got cleansed instead of his curse. The next morning, Blake goes to visit Alice in her room, but she comes out wearing Mia Khalifa's favorite gear, so he shuts the door and wonders if she considers him a man since she shows him so much skin. He remembers Viola telling him that the best way to make progress is to get his crush's heart pounding by startling them, so he decides to try it on Alice. However, his attempt to jump scare Alice fails miserably, as she simply smiles nonchalantly. A while later, Blake tries to scare her again by narrating the latest Insidious movie to her, but it doesn't work, so he searches for a painting to scare her. Alice finds the horror painting he's looking for hanging on the wall, but it doesn't scare her at all, so Blake starts freaking out as he wonders if her heart is made of titanium. However, she cheerfully tells him that her heart beats fast for him because she loves him, and this makes his heart pop out of his chest like a Looney Tunes character. While staring at the horror painting, Blake becomes so spooked that he accidentally knocks down a vase, and when he tries to pick up the flower, Rob tells him not to because it's a rare plant that only flowers once every 5 years. However, Rob suddenly approaches him with an axe like Michael Myers, so Blake runs away and hides in a closet. Alice joins him there, so he explains that Rob is scary when he's angry, and he won't forgive him until he's reflected on his actions. After Rob searches the room, Blake jumps out of the closet and moves to the hallway, but Rob finds him there, so he pretends to be Alice until the blind fool walks away. Shortly afterwards, Blake and Alice hide under a bed together, and he tells her about how he'd love to enjoy drinking and partying as an adult, so she confesses that her heart is pounding at the moment. However, Rob interrupts their romantic moment and takes Blake to the living room, where he shows him some jewelry hidden in the flower pot by some fraudulent maids in the past. Alice calls Blake a good detective for finding it, but in reality, he had no idea it even existed. A few days later, everyone is chilling in the living room, and Cuff is failing miserably at learning the alphabet. Blake assures her that they'll support her, so she explains that she wants to learn how to read and write as fast as possible so she can surprise Zane. When Blake asks where Zane is, Cuff reveals that he's at the circus, where he started working because he didn't have anything better to do, and no one will judge him for looking like a bird. Meanwhile, in the royal mansion, Blake's brother, Walter, walks majestically through the hallway, and his aura makes all the maids drool for him. He soon meets up with Viola and finds out that she's planning on going to visit Blake, so he tells her not to go and reminds her that he's going to inherit their family's title. However, Viola gives him a harsh reality check by reminding him that he's the second son, and his dreams of being a ruler will be shattered if the firstborn son, Blake, breaks his curse. This makes Walter so frustrated that he starts rolling on the ground like a deranged street dog, and when he finally calms down, he asks Viola how long it takes to reach Blake's mansion. She says it's 2 hours, and this confirms his accusations that she's been secretly visiting him, but he starts crashing out because the number 2 reminds him of his pathetic position in the family. Like a desperate simp, he asks her why she's going to see Blake instead of staying with him, and even though she explains that she isn't picking sides, the idiot begs her to stay with him. After Viola leaves, Walter then meets with their mom, Gerbera, at the dinner table and lies to her that Viola went to meet a friend, but he secretly plans to prove that he's more worthy of being the head of the family than Blake. Meanwhile, Viola arrives at the mansion, and she's surprised to see Cuff there, so she introduces herself as a circus performer. However, Viola still suspects her, and as she admires a statue that reminds her of Zane, Viola concludes that she's a burglar and tries to tackle her, but her face bounces off Cuff's mommy milkers, which makes her curse the plot gods for abandoning her. Seeing that Viola is depressed, Cuff offers to play with her, but Viola tackles her and ties up her hand. However, Cuff doesn't mind this at all, and she tells Viola that Blake is a good guy, which she agrees with. When Cuff asks if she likes her brother, Viola starts blushing, but Blake suddenly arrives with Rob and Alice, and they see her on top of Cuff, so they walk away to give them privacy. Shortly afterwards, everyone is bonding together, and Rob cleans off some dust from Viola's hair, making her so excited that she rushes to the window and screams that her wish came true. Hours later, Blake and Alice are playing chess together, and Alice closes the curtains while pointing out that it's snowing outside just like the first day she arrived there. Back then, Blake was drowning in so much misery that he looked like a special grade curse, but Rob invited Alice into his messy room, and she introduced herself as his new maid. He angrily asked Rob why he hired a maid without permission, but Rob explained that the lady of the house permitted him because Alice and Blake are old friends. However, Blake said he didn't want to be reminded of his earlier years because they were miserable, and he told Alice to leave the mansion, claiming there was no place for her there. Despite this, Alice rushed towards him and told him that she hadn't forgotten about him, and being able to meet him again was her dream come true. He warned her that she'd die if he touched her, but she said she already knew about it, so he asked her to go back to her aunt's house, where she came from. However, Rob pretended not to hear him and asked her to join him in finding a room, and on her way out, Alice told Blake that he hadn't changed because he still had a gentle look in his eyes. After she left, Blake lay on the ground and wished they'd just leave him so he'd die alone. Meanwhile, Rob and Alice arrived at a shed outside, and Rob asked Alice if she was sure about using such a rundown place as her room, but she said it was fine since it was more comfortable than the cramped mansion. As they entered, Rob apologized for Blake's behavior, but she said she didn't mind it, so he shook her hand while telling her that she looked just like her mother. The next morning, Blake was shocked to see that Alice was still in the house, wearing a maid's outfit, and when she complimented his hat, he blushed but threw it on the ground and complained that her outfit was too revealing. However, she started teasing him by dangling her omega-sized plots in his face, but this caught him off guard, so he told her he hated her and ran away. A while later, Blake was at the piano, and Alice arrived with some food, but he told her that he was not going to eat anything until she left, so she asked if he didn't like her. Blake admitted that he didn't hate her, and he felt that she was laughing at him inside for being an ugly, miserable loser, but she cheerfully claimed that his rant was poetic and asked him to eat the cold one more time before leaving. While she was talking to Rob, Blake suddenly called her and took her to his messed up room, which he asked her to clean up in 3 days alone if she didn't want to get fired. As she cleaned up the room, she remembered the day Blake found her lying sick on the grass and helped her up. By the time Blake returned, he saw that his room looked shinier than Mike Tyson's head, and he was surprised that she did it in one night, so she explained that she was determined to be of use to him. This made him break down in tears, and he told her to do something more useful with her life than take care of a useless wrench, but she replied that she'd rather stay by his side. Soon after, Blake decided to leave that mansion since Alice wasn't going to leave, so he walked through the snow while remembering the witch telling him that he would never experience love ever again. Suddenly, he slipped and fell to the ground, and while lying down, he remembered when he met Alice in the past and prayed to see her again. When Alice arrived, he told her he wanted to die, but she dumped snow on his face, and with tears in her eyes, she told him not to throw away his life because she cared for him. After helping him back up, she asked him to go home with her and live with her forever, so he followed her back home. There, Rob was surprised to see that they were getting along, so Blake told him that he liked Alice. In the present, Blake is blushing while remembering those events, but Alice informs him that she just won their chess game. The next day, Viola asks Blake for ideas for a present to give Rob, and he suggests reading glasses, but she rejects the idea because she wants to be able to look into his eyes at all times. Alice then suggests a handkerchief, and she immediately accepts the idea, so Alice tells Blake that she's a hopeless romantic just like him. While getting dressed, Blake finds out from the calendar that it's Christmas Eve, and this makes him understand why Viola wants to get a present for Rob so badly. Alice then informs him that Cuff and Zane are planning to drop by later that day for the Christmas party they're holding, and Blake's social anxiety kicks in, as he wonders if it's okay for him to partake in a Christmas party even though he looks like the Undertaker, so Alice teases him to take his mind off things. Meanwhile, Viola wishes her mom a Merry Christmas, but Gerbera brings up how she's been going out a lot lately and asks her to stay indoors for Christmas. Viola cheerfully agrees, but Gerbera throws another curveball by asking her when she'd ditch the immature trash she's wearing, so she sadly apologizes and leaves the room. While walking through the hallway, Viola asks her guards to get everything ready, and they try to remind her of her mother's words, but she says it's okay, as long as she spends time with family. She also tells them they don't have to tag along since she's fine with just her driver, and this makes them realize that she's going to see Rob, so they join her anyway. Meanwhile, Blake is having some tea, and he wonders how they can make the Christmas party a success, since they don't have a tree or anything else to put people in the Christmas cheer. Alice brings up the fact that they don't have a Santa Claus as well, but his Gunner thoughts take over, as he starts having visions of Alice wearing a hot Santa Claus outfit. After snapping him back to reality, Alice explains that they don't need anything extra for the party since good food is enough to have a jolly time, and Blake agrees with her. Meanwhile, Viola is in the carriage, praying desperately that Rob loves her gift, but she has no idea that the person driving is her brother, Walter, who is determined to show his brother that he's more suited to lead the family. At the mansion, Zane and Cuff arrive with a Christmas tree, so Zane suggests that the girls should decorate the tree while he and Blake handle the other decorations. While decorating the house, Zane tells Blake about how Cuff has always been an airhead since her early years and thanks him for being her friend, but Blake thanks them as well for all their help. The dumb bird man then suggests wrapping a ribbon around Alice, and Blake actually starts having daydreams of Alice being packed up like a present for him, but Zane takes things a step further by suggesting they do it with Alice in her birthday suit, so Cuff angrily barbecues him. When they're all done with the decorations, Cuff wakes Zane up and gleefully shows him the Christmas tree she decorated with Alice. Zane suddenly remembers Blake motivating him to tell her how he feels, so Zane tells Cuff that she's pretty, just like the tree, but sees that she's already drifted to the dream world, so he tucks her in on the couch. When Viola arrives, she immediately rushes in, and this makes Walter assume that she's secretly eating Big Brother's sausage, but he finds that she dropped her present on the ground, which makes him even more fired up to take Blake down. He tiptoes inside the mansion like a spy, and he runs into the Santa Claus outfit, so he randomly puts it on, but Cuff suddenly arrives and starts jumping with excitement as she thinks that Santa has arrived. To maintain his cover, he starts acting like Santa and hands her Viola's present, but Viola chases him around and carries him to meet the others. Meanwhile, Viola is exhausted after searching everywhere for her present, but when she sees Zane chilling on the chair, she assumes he's Rob, so she starts cuddling him. However, the real Rob arrives with Alice and informs everyone that the Santa outfit they got is missing, but Viola has grown attached to Zane's feathery body, so she continues cuddling him. Suddenly, Walter crashes in through the chimney and tries to act like Santa, but Viola recognizes him immediately, so he ditches the disguise and tells Blake to call him a rival. Viola then scolds Walter for following her to the party and explains that she didn't come there because she's fond of Blake, and this makes both brothers collapse due to emotional damage. Walter is surprised that Blake knows witches, but he feels that he's not suited to lead the family, even if he breaks the curse. Just then, Cuff arrives through the window, and Villa starts wrestling her for the present, so Walter asks Blake if he plans to take control of the family, despite being unable to control the room. Blake says he'll be willing to inherit the title if the family accepts him back after his curse is broken, and Walter starts yapping about how his life is more cursed as a second-born son, but the girls interrupt him with their fighting, so Blake goes to stop them. As the battle intensifies, Cuff accidentally sets the present on fire, so Blake puts the fire out with his hands and hands it to Viola, so Viola thanks him with her face glowing red. Seeing this, Walter challenges Blake to a competition where the first person to discover the truth behind his curse would inherit the title, and the loser would remain the alternate for all time, and Blake accepts his wager. Walter tries to aura farm as he leaves, but all his aura points go down the drain as he stumbles and falls like a total moron. Following this, everyone has fun together at the Christmas party, and Walter watches from the outside because he can't go back home without Viola. After the party, Blake and Alice take a stroll through their snowy yard, and Alice teases her sugar boy once again until he trips and falls. While on the ground, he reminds her about how he was covered in snow in a similar way when he planned to die, until she came and changed his life. Back then, Blake told Alice that he liked her and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her by his side. Back in the present, Blake thanks Alice for being the reason he was able to celebrate a Christmas party with all his friends, and she tells him to accept it as her Christmas present to him. She then lies on the snow beside him and tells him she wants to share the cold ground beside him because they're going to go on living together, and this makes him realize that she's purer than he thought. Several years ago, Alice was a chibi girl walking around at home, and her mother, Sharon, suddenly hugged her from behind and reminded her that she had to stay in bed due to her health condition. Alice apologized, but Sharon explained that she wasn't mad and she was only worried about her. As Sharon walked ahead with Alice, all the maids started asking her questions about how to properly handle some tasks, and she gave them detailed answers. Seeing this, the senior servants glazed Sharon for being great at her job as head maid, but they pointed out that she lacked character, and she proved them right immediately as she started goofing off right in front of them. Sharon and Alice soon arrived at a hallway where Blake was running ahead, and he cheerfully waved at Alice, so she waved him back as he ran away. Seeing this, Sharon teases her for being friends with him, but promised that she wouldn't get in her way and kissed her on the head. Just then, Rob arrived and greeted Sharon, but his negative riz made Alice hide behind Sharon's skirt, so he broke the ice by asking what she thinks of her mother's work. Alice cheerfully responded that her mom's way of working is amazing, and she aimed to become a fine maid just like her when she grew up. So Rob told her that he was looking forward to the day they could work together. While tucking Alice in, Sharon hugged Alice tightly and promised to protect her no matter what because she loved her. In the present, Alice wakes up from a dream where she relived these events again and clutched her locket lightly. Later that morning, Viola is having breakfast with her family, and she realizes that her mom is super pissed at her, so she blames Walter for following her without her knowledge, but Walter is blaming Blake in his own mind for simply being the firstborn. Meanwhile, Cuff is skipping cheerfully through town, while Zane watches from a hiding spot, and he remembers when Viola told him that the reason Cuff is such a noodle brain is that he has been looking out for her too much. She then asked him to let her shop by herself, sometimes for her own good, and now, in the present, Zane decides that he'll watch her from afar without interfering. An old merchant hands Cuff a stack of groceries, but when she asks for money, Cuff realizes that she's cooked because Zane isn't around, and Cuff is having a full meltdown in his hiding spot, fighting the urge to bail her out. She then offers to trade a rock for the goods, but the old lady asks if her parents gave her money, and that's when her pimple-sized brain finally clocks that she was asking for money all along, so she hands the lady some coins. Shortly after, Cuff successfully buys bread from a bakery, and Zane is relieved to see that she's making progress. However, on her way out, a pickpocket yoinks her bag of coins, but she grabs him and tells him that Zane trusted her with the money. As she takes the money from him, the boy trips and falls towards a sharp fence, but Cuff saves him. She then notices that she's spilt the bag of groceries, and this makes her worry since it's Zane that sent her, but Zane arrives and helps her pack them up. That evening, Blake is hanging out on the balcony since he couldn't sleep, but Alice arrives and tells him to wait in his room for her. There, she goes under the sheets with him, and he asks her to leave after he falls asleep, but he starts sweating profusely when he realizes that he's sleeping next to the girl of his dreams. As he admires her beautiful face, she turns and starts teasing him, so he confesses that the tension is making it hard for him to sleep. However, Alice takes her teasing into overdrive by trying to take off her pajamas, and Blake starts crashing out because he knows Rob would lobotomize him if he catches them in that situation. Once they've calmed down, Blake tells Alice that it isn't right for an unwed couple to be sleeping beside each other since his mother warned him against it in the past, so she asks him what he thinks about his mom. Blake claims he doesn't have any strong feelings for her, but he knows she's waiting for him at home, so he wants to make peace with her and tell her about his relationship with Alice after breaking the curse. He admits that it's not easy for an heir to marry his maid, but he promises to put in effort to make it work, and if his family doesn't approve, he plans to break ties with them. However, Alice tells him not to consider doing that, so he decides to focus on breaking the curse and thanks her for helping him get sleepy again. As Alice walks away, Blake asks her to appear in his dreams again, and she asks him to do the same, but after leaving the room, she starts to miss him. The next morning, Blake cheerfully shows Rob a pair of mittens that Alice made for him and claims that they would keep him warm no matter what, so Rob points out that he's been smiling more recently, unlike his dark days. Alice then calls him upstairs to have breakfast, so he tells Rob not to smoke too much while rushing upstairs. While smoking his blunt, Rob remembered the day Gerbera tasked him with taking care of Blake after he was banished for being cursed. Back then, he saw Blake slowly lose his mind due to depression, so he made moves to get Alice away from her abusive aunt so she could serve Blake and light up his world. Now, in the present, Alice and Blake call Rob inside, so he moves in and decides that he'll be happy as long as both of them are. That evening, Blake plays an Adele song on his piano, and Alice praises him, so he admits that he loves spending time with her alone. He then asks her to sing for him while he plays the piano, and she agrees, so he plays the tune to a song called The Owl and the Cat, and Alice sings the lyrics with a voice more beautiful than Sabrina Carpenter's. At a certain point, she asks him to sing as well, and once he does, she's impressed by his voice, so they spend the next several minutes having a passionate duet, which leaves both of them flustered afterwards. While walking downstairs together, Alice tells Blake to head back to his room instead of escorting her all the way to hers and blows him a kiss goodbye. As she walks to her room, she accepts the fact that she's a lowly maid who doesn't deserve to stand by his side, but Blake suddenly arrives and asks to escort her. However, she teases him once again and runs back to her room without him. The next morning, Viola and Walter are searching around a packed storeroom for clues about the curse, and Walter suggests asking a maid to do it instead, but she explains that there would be trouble if their mom finds out about it. The idiot starts crashing out, so she reminds him that he's the one who offered to help her in the first place, which makes him explain that finding a clue to the curse would put him 2 steps above Blake. Inside a barrel, Viola finds a servant's logbook, so she runs away with it and asks Walter to clean up the storage room. In the hallway, she runs into Gerbera, so she quickly hides the book, but Gerbera scolds her for looking like a dirty warthog and commands a maid to change her into something cleaner. Minutes later, Viola arrives in Gerbera's study room in a Cinderella ripoff outfit, and Gerbera asks her to dress that way moving forward, but she complains that long skirts aren't her style, so her mom reminds her that she has to uphold the family name since she'll be married off to a different family soon. Like a typical Gen Z girl, she yells back at her mother, asking if she can't live her own life, but Gerbera nonchalantly walks past her while telling her that she can't. A while later, Viola is in the living room with Blake and Alice, crying over her mother's words, and Blake tries to calm her down by complimenting her dress, but she scolds him. When she's finally stopped crying, she cheerfully tells Blake that she's moving into his mansion starting that day, but he refuses because he doesn't want their mother to worry about her, so she offers to serve him as a maid, which he declines as well. While picking apart a flower, Viola starts whining about how she'd be free from her family's shackles if she lived at the mansion, but Rob suddenly arrives, causing her to jump in excitement. Rob then tells her she looks beautiful in the dress, so the simp queen does a full 180, as she decides that she'd be wearing that dress anytime she visits them. Later that evening, Viola follows Alice to her room while explaining that she wants to have another all-girls party with her and give her something as well. When they enter, they see that Cuff has already let herself in, so Viola scolds Cuff for not informing them without coming, but Alice tells them to leave the drama so they can start their girls' night. After changing into pajamas, Alice serves the girls tea and asks Viola if her mom gave her trouble about spending Christmas at Blake's mansion, so she reveals that her mom scolded her and Walter for it, especially Walter. She then says that she doesn't care who ends up inheriting the family title between Walter and Blake because they're both worthless idiots to her, but Cuff debunks her claim by bringing up how she blushed when she was asked if she loves Blake. To change the subject, Viola asks Cuff who she has a crush on, but Cuff gets so flustered that she tickles her to make her forget asking the question. Alice then reminds Viola of her promise to give her something, so Viola hands her the servant's logbook while explaining that it's from the time when Blake was cursed. While searching through the book, Alice finds her mother's handwriting, and Cuff finally admits that visiting them without asking wasn't nice, so Viola teases her by slapping her melons. Shortly afterwards, all three ladies lie side by side like sardines in the small bed, and the two visitors start fighting over who should sleep in the mansion, but Alice simply laughs at them. However, Daleth watches them through an owl, and she takes off her mask as she decides that it's time to act. She later summons Zane to her quarters and asks him to deliver a message to Blake and Alice. The next morning, Alice tells Rob about the servant's logbook that Viola gave her and hands him the book to see the pages he wrote, but he complains that his own handwriting is worse than a quack doctor's. As Alice looks through her mom's pages, she finds a section where Alice wrote about two women in white nuns' habits she hasn't seen before, so she asks Rob if he saw anything of the sort. Rob says he didn't see anything, but Alice remembers the events of the witches' Sabbath, which makes her realize that her mom was writing about Daleth and some other mystery person. Just then, Zane arrives and informs them that Daleth seeks friendship with them, which actually means that she wants them to stay out of her business. But despite this, he assures them that he and Cuff will always have their back. Alice then tells Zane and Blake about the servant's logbook she's reading, so Zane asks her to tell him if he finds anything interesting. A while later, Alice watches from the door while Blake and Zane play around at the piano, and Blake tells Zane that he wants to be the only one to tell Alice he loves her, which makes her so flustered that her face burns red. Hours later, Blake tells Rob that he can't find Zane anywhere anymore, and Alice realizes that her logbook has disappeared from where she hid it. While walking on the roof, Zane remembers Daleth threatening to unalive Cuff if he doesn't destroy the logbook, so he creates some flames to burn it. Suddenly, Blake arrives, so he tells him about Daleth's blackmail and hands him back the book since it would have useful information for him. However, Blake hands him back the book and tells him to burn it because he doesn't want to cause problems for his dear friends. To repay his goodwill, Zane informs Blake that Daleth is watching over their mansion and destroys the book using a special spell that lets him keep a scrap, which he plans to use in reviving the book after Daleth's surveillance on their house is gone. Meanwhile, Daleth is ticked off because she saw through their trickery, but she decides to let it slide for the meantime. After taking off her mask, she opens up a coffin, which has the body of Sharon inside. The next day, Blake gets a letter from his mother, inviting him to come see her at the family mansion for a discussion, which makes him worried. When Alice arrives, he expresses his worries that he doesn't know what Gerbera could say to him since his curse hasn't been lifted yet, but she cheers him up with jiggle physics once again. During breakfast, Blake tells Alice that he's feeling anxious because it'll be his first time going home since coming to live in his current mansion, and he hasn't lifted the curse. Alice then asks to accompany him to the main residence, and he cheerfully agrees, so she leaves to make some more tea for him. That evening, Blake and Alice are riding in a carriage leading to the family mansion, and she asks if he remembers his family estate, but he says he only remembers himself fooling around with his friends back then. When he asks Alice, she says she only remembers him, and this makes him blush. Once they arrive, Alice steps out of the carriage and starts admiring the beautiful mansion, but Viola meets them outside and scolds them for coming late, so Blake apologizes to her. Alice then decides to go greet some of the other maids, and Viola informs her that she told them she was coming, so Alice thanks her and blows Blake a kiss before moving ahead. As Blake walks through the hallway with his siblings, he notices that the surrounding maids are all acting like statues, but they soon arrive at their mom's room, where Walter confesses that he's the one who told her about Viola visiting the mansion. However, Blake says it's no problem and praises him for being a gentleman, so he scolds Blake for being a goody two-shoes. When Blake enters Gerbera's room, she immediately brings up the fact that he hasn't broken the curse in the 10 years he's had it, so he apologizes and asks her to give him a while longer. Since it's too late to talk, she decides to postpone it to the next day and permits Blake to stay at the mansion until then. He tries to tell her something, but she coldly tells him to wait till they talk the next day, so he leaves the room and his siblings lead him to the guest room. Meanwhile, all the maids are glazing Alice for looking as beautiful as her mother, and an elder maid hugs her while apologizing for not being able to help her after Sharon died. While walking through the hallway together, the old maid tells Alice that her room is all cleaned up nicely, but Gerbera suddenly arrives and calls her Sharon, so the maid introduces her as Sharon's daughter. Realizing her mistake, Gerbera walks away, so the old maid explains to Alice that Gerbera and Sharon were practically besties when she was alive, but after Sharon died, Gerbera started acting like Darth Vader at home. A while later, Alice is chilling in her room, but Blake arrives and sits beside her to have a chat. When he tells her about his experience with his mom, Alice says she's happy that they were able to talk normally, but Blake confesses that he's missing her like crazy. Even though it's only been a few hours, they've been apart. She then teases him by leaning in for a kiss, but he jumps away and starts geeking out about how beautiful she looks before leaving the room. The next morning, Viola takes Blake to the grave in the yard where Blake was originally cursed all those years ago, and this gives him a flashback of the event. Back then, Blake was searching for a 4-leaf clover to give to Alice, but a purple smoke suddenly covered the area, and the witch cursed him to live a miserable life filled with death. As they walk ahead, Viola asks why he didn't remember Alice when she first arrived at his mansion, so he explains that he unknowingly purged her from his memory because of the loneliness and depression he was facing. They soon meet up with their mom, who asks Viola to move away from him and scolds her for wearing normal clothes again before asking Blake to talk with her during dinner. After she leaves, Blake shows concern for Viola, but she says it's okay because she knows being born in their family means living in a cage with no freedom throughout their lives. She then claims that Blake has a better life than them, and this shocks him as he remembers Walter saying the same thing several days earlier. Afterwards, they meet up with Gerbera at the dinner table, and she tells Blake that he has to decide who should be the heir of the family between himself and Walter because time is running out due to their father's illness. She then informs him that she plans on making Walter the heir if he doesn't get rid of the curse, so he promises to get it done by spring, and she announces that it's all she has to say. However, Blake informs her that he plans on getting married to Alice one day if she approves, but Gerbera bluntly refuses and explains that he isn't allowed to get married to a lowly maid since he was born into aristocracy. She then tells him to stop joking, but Blake gets up and passionately tells her about how Alice saved him from the darkness before boldly claiming that he'll marry Alice no matter what. As Walter and Viola stare in shock, Blake tells his mom that he and his siblings aren't objects, and he walks away, but they both rush to follow him. However, Gerbera smiles and says she's proud of how Blake grown from a meek little boy to a man who can speak back to her. Outside, Blake reunites with Alice, and they enter the carriage, where they stare passionately into each other's eyes as they make their way back home. That's it for this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed and watch this video on screen.